welcome to the 4th Biennial Design Science Symposium, hosted here by the Edna Lawrence Nature Lab and the Synergetics Collaborative, STEM to STEAM through Synergy, with rather an ambitious subtitle. We had some very interesting conversations yesterday about what this all means, and basically we're continuing to discuss that, listen, and do workshops this afternoon all about these topics. Our next speaker, and we're thrilled to have her, is Dr. Dayna Baumeister. Dayna received her BS in marine biology from the New College in Sarasota, Florida. It's interesting that you're here in Rhode Island. We're 17% ocean, just so you know. That's why we have the name the Ocean State. Dayna received her PhD in organismic biology and ecology from the University of Montana in Missoula. She partnered with Dayna partnered with Janine Benyus, the author of Biomimicry, the book, written, I think, 16 years ago now, something like that. A wonderful read. If you haven't read it, you should. It's still as pertinent and poignant today as it was when it was first published. Together, they went on to found the Biomimicry Guild, which is a consulting practice. This morphed into the Biomimicry Institute, which is a 501c3 charitable organization. And most recently, the Biomimicry 3.8, a B Group, a B Corp, social enterprise that trains, certifies, and connects biomimicry professionals worldwide. Dayna designed and taught the first biomimicry professional certification program, a 2-year master level for designers, business people, biologists, and engineers, with participants from all around the world. And this is very much what we're trying to do here, is this cross-disciplinary effort to bring all the disciplines under one umbrella and have it be this sort of mutually informative collection of human intelligence. Right? Terrific. Anyway, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Dayna Baumeister.
Okay, let's see if I can pull this up here. So we stand at a point in time in the history of humans on this planet where we need to begin asking ourselves, are we going to fit in or are we going to just fit upon the planet? We face a numerous amount of challenges, and there's certainly signals that we receive on a daily basis of what does it mean to live here? And are we going to end up in a place where we have to live in glass bubbles in order to survive and endure? And of course, we have to ask ourselves, will it be our cleverness alone that will save us? That's what got us here, our cleverness. These are neurons. This is a close-up of a neuron firing in our brains, and that has led to all of the amazing things that we see as humans around us that are a byproduct of our science and our technology and our engineering and our design and our math. That's what we are surrounded by. But I have to ask the question, are those neurons going to be enough? Is that really what it's going to be to help us make it through this period we're in time? And of course, naturally, then you have to go and ask yourself, well, what does it mean to be an inhabitant here? Right? This is really the context in which every one of our conversations needs to happen and take place. What does it mean to be an inhabitant here on this planet? And then naturally you go and say, well, what does it mean to be human? And one of the ways that I like to think about this question, and of course there are entire philosophical discourses that have been going on for 5, 8, 10,000 years about what it means to be human. But I look at it from a biological evolutionary perspective, and I want to share a little bit of that with you. Because this, of course, is the foot of a young child, and to me it's a really healthy reminder that we as a species are actually just infants on this planet. And the way to think about this is to to really step back, to zoom out in time and look at the birth of our planet, which is 4.5 billion years ago. And now billion, sadly, doesn't really sound like that much when we have trillion-dollar deficits and things like that, and companies that are worth, $30 billion. But I want to put billion into perspective for you. So we're going to take 4.5 billion years and compress it down into 1 year, because we can get our head around what 1 year means. That makes sense to us. So on January 1st is when the Earth was born, just past midnight, so 12 o'clock and a fraction of a second. And we're standing here today on February 1st think of it as December 31st, at the end of that year. So 4.5 billion years compressed into a year. So let's see what happens in that year. Well, for the first almost 2 months, we have nothing but that primordial soup. Volcanoes and lightning storms and a lot of water on the planet going on. And it's not until February 25th that life appears. That's what we sort of considered life's birthday. And so it took 7 weeks for us to see some of those early organisms. And in fact, they're still here today. These early bacteria and the colonies. This picture comes from Australia. So they've been around for 3.8 billion years, hence the name Biomimicry 3.8, if you were curious. That's where that comes from. And then it takes a full month before we see photosynthesis. So we've got just sort of chemical synthesis going on. It's not until late March that life figures out how to harness energy from the sun and put that to good use. And again, that chloroplast and that process of photosynthesis, it's been around for quite a long time. But notice this is March, and we have single-celled organisms. It's not until August. So we have March and April and May and June and July and half of August before we have multicellular organisms coming together, before there's more than one cell involved in an organism. And then we have to wait an entire another month before sex to happen. So it's not even until September 17th that we have mixing of genes. And when we mix genes, no different than we see in a STEAM kind of environment, when we mix those ideas, then suddenly all sorts of things can happen. Then there can be this incredible diversification. And you can imagine if we're going from just a few small cells in early fall to where we are today, there's got to be a lot happening. So in November, the fungi show up. So just 6 weeks ago, they are the first organisms to colonize land. Up until this point, there's been nothing on terra firma. All of it has been happening in the ocean. And just in the last 6 weeks, we've seen everything that we see here today. November 20th is when you get backbones and fish showing up in the sea. November 22nd is when we have land plants coming. Right, just those first little plants showing up. Insects, those were the first invertebrates to walk on the land. They've been around for about 5 weeks, since November 24th. Amphibians, again, now when you see the trajectory of how much faster this diversification is happening, amphibians have been around for a month, a whole whopping month. And then reptiles which really dominated the planet, remember the dinosaurs were reptiles, showed up on December 6th. And they really dominated the planet for about 350 million years. But that 350 million years is pretty short in our year time. Mammals, our friends, the ones when we think of life, we tend to think of other mammals, have really only been here for 2 weeks. Birds, a little bit less, and they came and arose from the reptiles. Flowers, believe it or not, have only been here for 11 days, and that's it. All that incredible diversity, all that the color and the interactions with other insects and pollinators has just been happening in the last 11 days. And the dinosaurs, we think of them going extinct a really long time ago. It was a bad Christmas day for the dinosaurs. That's when the asteroid hit the planet around 6:30 in the evening. And that was literally just 6 days ago in our compressed year of the planet. So now you notice I haven't mentioned any humans yet, right? We still haven't shown up. And in fact, only our ancestors, the two-legged hominids, show up today about 12 and a half hours ago. Not even Homo sapiens sapiens. We still haven't arrived on this planet. And it's not until 24 minutes ago that our species shows up in the evolutionary timeline. And that's about 200,000 years ago, that we as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, has been here on the planet. Just in the last 24 minutes, agriculture was born 10,000 years ago. That's only 1 minute. We've traveled a whole year. 10,000 years ago was just 1 minute. And then the entire Industrial Revolution that has given life as we know it, and where we tend to think of where we get all of our ideas and how we're going to figure out how to solve this problem, is not a minute. It's less than 2 seconds. I had to round it up to 50. Right? It's less than 2 seconds that we have been on this planet, engaged in the way that we're living right now. And so we have to, wonder, is this life's evolutionary pinnacle? Did it go through all of this work since February 25th to get to this point, to create this kind of way of living on this planet? Well, while it may feel like this has been a long trajectory, and we can't really say what lies ahead, there's a couple of things that we do know to be true, and that is that, of course, that the sun is still out there. So if we want to go past our moment in time right now of just a breath past midnight on January 1st and fast forward and see what happens, the only thing that I can tell you is that on February 16th of next year, the sun will explode, and that will be the end of the planet. All right, so we're only halfway through the age of our planet, and who knows what else will be happening. And hopefully you see that that means that we're such a small sliver in the story of what's happening here. So what does that last 24 minutes as a species, the last minute as an agricultural species, and the last second really tell us about how to live here, and what does it mean to be human, and how are we going to fit in? It is not about saving the planet. The planet, unless you can figure out how to stop the sun from exploding, the planet's going to be okay. It's about saving ourselves as a species and figuring out how we're going to fit here. So how do we fit in? That should be our fundamental, ultimate question in every design process that we're ever involved in. How are we going to fit in? How are we going to be a member of this planet? Well, the good news is that we are nature. We were part of that evolutionary timeline. We evolved, and we have this deep connection with all of these other species. There's up to 30 million other species on this planet today, and it represents just 1% of all the species that have ever lived here. And we've only given names to 1.8 million of them. And that's all we know is a name and where we found it. And there's only about a couple 100,000 that we know more than just a name and where it is. So while we are nature, there's something that we really fundamentally need to get in the practice of, and that is quieting our cleverness. We need to recognize that while those neurons have done incredible, fantastic things for us as a species, we really need to put ourselves back in the mind of a child, where the child really knows it does not know how to fit in. It knows it does not know how to live here, and it asks a lot of questions. Mom, how does this work? How do I live here? It should be no different for us as a species saying, Mom, to our planet and the other species, how do I live here? I'm young, I need to figure this out. I want to grow up, and I want to stay here, so how do I live here? And that, at its core, is what biomimicry is ultimately about. It is quieting that cleverness, being humble, and being willing to ask all of these other species that are out there, how do you do this? How have you managed to live here so well since, at a minimum, or at a maximum, February 25th, or however many days and weeks and months that you've been here? And how did you survive all of those mass extinctions that happened on this planet? And when we think of biomimicry, we think of it as the conscious emulation of nature's genius. And we actually choose those 4 words pretty carefully, pretty intentionally. Conscious implies there's an intent, there's an actual choice. Just like in STEAM, there's an actual choice to bring art and design into the conversation. When you actively choose to ask the natural world, it's amazing what you can discover. And then emulation is also very important. Notice we're not saying mimicking or direct copying, but emulate is about pulling the essences, the design principles, the design guidelines. We'll never fly like a dragonfly. I mean, that will never scale appropriately. But what can we learn about the principles of dragonfly flight that might better inform more efficient flight and more effective flight for our species? And then the nature's genius is, well, based on the premise that she's been around a little longer than we have, and there's probably some genius in that. Of all the species that we see here today, these are the ones that have figured out how to live here. So I'm assuming that they're pretty smart about that. So this intersection of biology and nature and life and design and innovation and technology is really where biomimicry lives. And when we think of biomimicry, there's many, many different layers of how we go about the practice. And I'm going to share some stories and some case studies with you, but it's far more than the sexy snippets that you see in the media. Remember that the media only likes to report on what you can grab in a sound bite, but it's far more than that. Biomimicry at its core is an emerging discipline. There's a practice and there's tools and techniques, but it has an ancient, ancient history. We've just kind of forgotten. I mean, if you think about the fact that for 24 minutes we did really well on this planet because we were asking our neighbors, how do you live here? How do you survive? Prairie dog, what lessons can you teach me about ventilation in this place? How do you survive here, polar bear? What can you teach me about snow as a building material? We asked those questions, but we've forgotten. We've surrounded ourselves with these walls. I mean, we have no idea what it looks like outside right now. And for many of us, we can't even remember the last time we didn't even walk on a man-made surface. When did you just rub those toes in the snow? It's grass, not this time of year, but when did you get back and touch that? So this emerging discipline is about remembering who we are, remembering our past and our connection with the other species. So we look at nature as model, measure, and mentor. And it is a different way than a lot of the other bios that we see today. Biotechnology is still the old paradigm of the Industrial Revolution. It is about what we can take. We can take wood, we can take fuel, we can take coal, we can take soil, we can take. We can extract. But biomimicry says, excuse me, can I borrow your recipe, please? What is it that makes your systems work so well? And it is an entirely different relationship moving forward as a species. So with that, there is an ethos. It is a reconnecting ourselves and reminding ourselves that we are a species. When we work in the field of biomimicry, we ask the question all the time, what's worth doing? Does it make sense to emulate a tuna fish to build a better nuclear warhead so that when it goes through the water, it's undetected by sonar, that the enemy thinks it's a tuna fish instead? Something about that doesn't fit right for me, So we ask that question about what are we actually emulating and why? To what end? And can we use these lessons that we're borrowing so that not only our species better fits in, but the planet as a whole benefits from that process? Another part of this is about reconnecting. It's not just going into a lab and digging into the science and forgetting where all of that came from. You know, I've met geneticists that can tell you everything about the DNA code of a species, but could not identify it in the field. They have absolutely no idea, oh, that's the mustard plant that I've been studying? So we need to bridge that gap and reconnect us back to each other and to the natural world. And that's a huge, important part of the work that we do. And then there is the story about emulation. There is the piece of, okay, what does it mean to draw upon these ideas? And I want to share some of the things that are happening out there, because that's where you can sort of get your head wrapped around what does it mean to ask nature for advice, and where can that actually happen? Whoops, I guess I don't have the same font on this computer as mine. So we can mimic the forms of nature, so the morphology that we're talking about here in this conference, but it's more than just borrowing nature's forms, because there's a function behind those forms, and so you borrow the form to achieve the function. But we can also ask the question of not just what have you made, but how have you gone about making that form? And can we learn from the process that's going on? How does the firefly create light? And then we can also ask the much more important question of how do you fit in the larger system? So what have you made, how did you make it, and how does it all fit together? And we see biomimicry examples at each of these levels, far more at the form, because that's a little easier to accomplish, and fewer at process and ecosystem. So here's a few examples. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but hopefully I provided enough information in the text that if you want to go find out more, you can definitely look into this. This is a process. We're talking about making new materials. This is a process of making new materials that learns how pine cones are able to open and close with humidity based on the way their fibers are laid down in the bracts of the cones. And they're using that to have materials that dry into any shape that you want. So customized drawing of shape. So rather than extruding or cutting, it's basically growing to shape, or in this case, drying to shape by looking at that molecular properties of the pine cones. This one is a product that's on the market. A designer actually in one of our programs was really inspired by the white bark pine trees and how they twist to add strength. And he had been tasked by his client to build a water bottle with significantly less plastic. And so this Vitalis water bottle, they're in Portugal, is the thinnest water bottle on the market. And he was able to reduce the plastic by, I think, at least 15%, if not more, by adding twists, by adding irregular spiral twists to the bottle, a lesson from the white bark pine that led to huge savings in plastics and material costs and even shipping costs, because you're shipping less weight. This is right here, pretty close in your backyard. This is a combination of what we call bioutilization and biomimicry, because they're actually using protein from spider silk and chitin from shrimp shells, which is why it's called shrilk. So a combination of shrimp and silk. And what they're trying to mimic is that the wings, the underwings that you often see in many, many beetles. Now certainly the flying beetles all have that. And it's an alternative for plastic. It's fully biodegradable, but it's biomimetic in that the way they assembled the protein from the silk and the chitin was by understanding at the molecular scale what's going on with these processes. And what's really interesting, and where there's huge opportunities for STEAM, is a lot of this research is happening in the labs, but the scientists really don't necessarily know what to do with this stuff. And I can imagine the designers in the room are thinking of lots of great things of what you could do with this stuff. And you can imagine where that kind of work can ultimately go and bridge new research and bridge new design because of those kinds of collaborations. This one looks at the way pitcher plants, which are carnivorous, they eat insects, they have super, super slippery slopes. So when ants crawl on the lips, they can't get out and they slide down into this vat of acid that the pitcher plant dissolves the ant with, and that's how it eats it. And this is a new coating called slips that is extremely oleophobic and hydrophobic. And oleophobic means resist water. All sorts of incredible, oleophobic means resisting oil. And hydrophobic is resisting water. And so all sorts of opportunities for coating pipes, for coating food packaging, where there's really no waste. There's nothing left, nothing that sticks. It saves on cleaning and all sorts of different opportunities by just having a non-stick surface that isn't Teflon that's going to kill you if you eat it. So. This one also, you got a bunch of things happening in your backyard. This comes from the Venus flytrap, also a carnivorous plant. This is the one that snaps closed and grabs things. Well, its leaves have two bistable states. They can be convex and they can be concave. And it stays in one, it gets triggered, and then flips to that other stable state. Well, they've developed this plastic that can also do the same, flip from one side to the other. And the plastic can be sensitive to different things, different gases, different temperatures, whatever you want to sort of tune it to be programmed for. And then when it flips state, it changes color. So the first example that they came up with was for food packaging, like meat packaging. And when meat starts going bad, it gives off a gas. So when you put that on there and you have it sensitive to that gas, instead of like trying to smell your meat and figure out if it's bad, you just look as, well, has the color pop changed and told me that this meat is starting to rot? And you can imagine lots of other applications for having that kind of self-tuned signaling could be really useful. This one comes out of Germany. This is a spider on the right, and this you're on the left, and on the right is a close-up of a piece of glass. And millions, shockingly, millions of birds die every year from crashing into high-rises. And there are actually people in big cities whose job is to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sweep up the dead birds from the streets so that we don't see them, which is terrible. I mean, we should know what our buildings are doing because a lot of these cities are in flyways. They're where birds are migrating. And so, especially at night, birds can't see, but even during the day, it's very difficult. And of course, they crash into the glass. So the scientists here ask the question of, well, how is it that a bird can fly through a forest and never crash into spider webs, for example? They're transparent. Why aren't they hitting those? And they found that spider webs spin into their webs fibers that reflect ultraviolet light. And birds can see ultraviolet light. So to a bird, that spider web is not transparent at all. It's actually quite solid. So they embedded in the glass fibers that reflect ultraviolet light. So this is what it looks like to the bird. The bird now knows that there's something there. But of course, since we can't see it, it looks completely clear to us. And I mean, if you stand at certain angles, you can catch a little bit of it. But like when they then do the test, 99.8% of the birds avoided the glass, right? They see it and they know. So this is in pretty heavy production in Europe right now. This one was a joint project, and we're seeing a lot of that sort of collaboration happen in universities. This one was very interesting because they're looking at fireflies, and of course you need to magnify that light and make it quite bright. And the close-up, this is at the micro scale, of the body over the glowing part of the firefly. It turned out that the micro scale was a magnifier for light, not the nanoscale, which was very, very difficult to emulate. So they were able to figure out what the rules, the guidelines were. They weren't like, peeling off firefly bodies, but they were actually recreating the design principle of this shingled effect and put it on LEDs and got 50% more brightness out of the LED, right, just by learning that lesson from the firefly. This is a project that's being prototyped right now in Guangzhou, which is one of the biggest cities in China, huge traffic issues, as you might imagine, and trying to understand about how it's called, there's a whole mathematical world called swarm theory, and understanding how swarms of insects forage, how they avoid crashing into each other, how schools of fish school, how birds flock without crashing, and the mathematics and the simple rules around those are being applied in lots of different ways. And this one is they're trying to apply it to the timing of traffic lights. And so actually having those traffic lights be attuned to what's happening in those places using these same mathematical rules. And the tests that they did improved waiting times, decreased waiting times by 28% in this small zone of the city where they ran the tests. Fish swim in the sea, but they don't get all gunked up. They don't get biofouled like all of our ships do. And what we put on our ships today is copper. And copper leaches and, of course, kills everything. That's why we use it. We put it on the ship so nothing attaches to the sides of the ship. Well, this company asked the question of, well, why isn't anything attaching to the side of fish? What's their magic secret? And it turns out fish secrete a gel that promotes the growth of good bacteria, that creates a biofilm around the fish. So when you feel fish and they're all slimy, that's not just fish slime. That's actually their little colony that's taking care of them slime. And so this company has developed a coating that you can put on boats that will promote the growth of the good biofilms and keep barnacles and all the other things that are attaching to boats at bay without the use of copper and arsenic. This is a fun one. This one comes out of Spain. Humpback whales, when they fish, they swim in really, really tight circles and blow bubbles while they're swimming in tight circles. And they do it around a school of fish. So they create a net. The fish don't want to swim through this wall of bubbles. They create a net. And then at the bottom, the humpback whale does it as it's swimming down, and then at the bottom, it goes to the bottom of its net, opens its mouth, swims straight up, grabs everybody that's trapped in the net. And so these folks, these were actually design students at a university, said, well, why can't we use that? And they created these tubes that secrete bubbles that you can lay down and you can turn on and off depending on where the schools of fish are and trap the fish. And then they have this huge vacuum system, I guess, that pulls the fish out of the sea. So no nets, no nylon, no entanglement. Obviously, a turtle has no problem going through a bubble net wall, but it traps the fish. And so they're using them in bays. I think open ocean might be a little bit more difficult, but using those in bays right now. And then there's things we can learn from the natural world about how we even work with some materials. One of the things that allows frogs to sit at the surface of the water and sort of stay stuck there is because of these capillary channels they have on their feet which trap air bubbles. And that holds them in place. And graphene is a really great material to work with, but it moves around a lot. And so they looked at the frog, looked at those principles, created these capillary channels with bubbles, and are now finding far more efficient and effective ways to work with graphene, which is a carbon-based molecule, and changing the way that sort of production is happening. Then this next set, I've got a few more I want to share with you, especially for the students in the room, is we have a student design challenge every year. And these are some of the winners from our challenge last year, which was around water. And this group came out of Canada. They were very interested in how to get all the air bubbles that are in pipes out of those pipes. And just through cavitation alone, you end up with a lot of air bubbles, and that means it makes it very difficult for pumps, and they work harder, and it creates more corrosion in pipes. And so they looked at fish gills to understand, because that's what fish gills are doing, right? Grabbing bubbles out of the water so the fish can breathe. And came up with this product. And these students are then going on to develop these and actually create products on the market. This was a group out of Mexico, out of the Yucatan They were inspired by bromeliads and spiders and developed this water catchment system using this really beautiful structure to harvest rain in impoverished, drought in areas. This was the grand prize group, which was a group of women from Cairo. When they won, it was just fabulous to watch them. They were so excited. They were inspired by the digestive system of their backyard neighbor, the camel, and how the camel filters water so well. And a lot of the irrigation that's been happening in Egypt today is using awfully dirty water, which makes for very unhealthy agricultural practices. And so they developed an entire system around the digestive system of the camel. And then these two from the Netherlands became really aware of the fact that the biggest issue around agriculture today is that almost half of the food we produce never makes it to the table, that it's lost in transit from perishing. And so they looked at bees and how bees manage temperature and humidity and have created these really impressive crates that really extend the life of food. And they're non-refrigerated, but yet they maintain food in a fresh state. And they're now taking prototypes and are developing them all over East Africa right now. So these students are really taking these projects and running with them. And this year, our challenge is around transportation. And I put this up because we're almost at the deadline. So if you're a student and you're interested, or a teacher and you want to get your students involved, it is a university level program. And what's really cool is we have people from all over the world, as you see, participating. The year before, the grand prize winners were from Iran, and second place was from Latvia. And so you never know where this is happening in the world, which is really fun to see the passion and excitement. I love that biomimicry is as universal as it is. So there's a couple of examples, and of course we have a database of hundreds more. We have a website called asknature.org, so you can go and ask the question of how does nature solve this, and find all sorts of both examples of what other people have done and a lot of really rich biology that might help you. And so we stand here at this crux in time when we ask ourselves, how will we fit in? How can we learn from these other species to figure out what it means to be here on this planet? And can we be as well adapted as this tree? I mean, that's the ultimate challenge for us. I mean, if you want the holy grail and something to aspire to, is just go out and pick up any organism out there. And believe it or not, I would make a case that hands down, they are far more better designed and well adapted and more fitted in than we are as a species. So where do we start? Well, here. Right? Go outside. We're surrounded by genius, and that's the beauty. We don't have to come up with these ideas out of thin air. We have this information, but it will only happen when we bring all of this together, when we bring the sciences and technology and engineering and art and design and math and all of us together to figure out, are we going to survive? When you do the timeline, 100,000 years from now, will we even bother mentioning this species that showed up sometime on December 31st as a blip? Will we be part of the story? And one thing that we know to be true is that life creates conditions conducive to life. And we should be able to take off that first word life and replace it with I create conditions conducive to life. My design creates conditions conducive to life. My process, my company, my work, whatever it might be. Because I can tell you that the other 30 million species, they can all hold up their hands and say, yeah, I do that. I fit that role. So we have to do that by getting in what I call the position of curiosity, right? The crouch. And getting in and taking a closer look at the natural world. These are my kids, and this is the position I often find them in, as you might imagine. And when we can remember that curiosity and that awe and that wonder about where we fit as a species on this planet, then and only then will we actually achieve the synergy and the fitting in that we're looking for. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, that was inspiring. And this is not a question, but I just want to mention to you that I have a friend, a colleague in Chicago who's a biologist/artist, and there's a whole project going on there with the birds in the glass, dying birds.
Yeah.
So they have citizen bird gatherers who gather the dead birds and bring them to their labs. They're opening up birds and finding the undigested seeds and so on and planting them in the city, and so they have whatever things growing from the dead birds, insides. So
Well,
that's
that works as long as we solve the glass problem.
Yeah,
otherwise
right.
we're just luring them in for more
right.
trouble.
But at least they're doing something for the time being with what otherwise would just be dead birds.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you. Are there any other questions for now? Yeah.
A couple of years ago, there was a student group that was doing some work with biomimicry, and I attended some of their stuff. Kachina Goslin, I think is her name. And one of the things that happened through that was I got access to the biomimicry information, and I was looking at, never finished this, but I was looking at biomimicry and decision-making and thinking, because I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that's there. And just scratching that surface was really interesting, looking at how organisms make decisions. And I think that's something that we really need to dive much deeper into.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating to me is when you begin to look at these functional questions, so the function of decision-making, or the function of attachment, or the function of communication, that you have these experts in biology that know this stuff, but they've never thought about it as having any value to us humans in the form of what we could learn from that. And I'm starting to see more and more books, like I have one on my shelf called the Conflict Resolution in Nature. Right? So you understand how all these other organisms, and it's not about, okay, you need to go act like a chimpanzee and solve your problems like a chimpanzee, but what are the deep patterns that are underneath that? What are the deep patterns around decision making? There's one that I can't remember the name off the top of my head that just came out around security. And how can we as a nation learn from other organisms on security? And it's not what you think. It's not like spikes and camouflage and toxins. It's more around resilience and some of those lessons. I think it's Lessons from the Octopus, I think is the name of the book. And then, I've got books, Attachment Mechanisms in Nature. I mean, awesome. I love that this biologist spent his entire life looking at how insects attach to things. And of course he did it because he was totally geeking out on it and loved it, but it's like our favorite book. And so there's all sorts of these bridges that can be made, and I think the opportunity to be able to go to these scientists and say, this work is really cool and really valuable, and here's, as a designer, what I want to do with it and go run with it is a whole bunch of magic can still happen. Yeah.
One moment, Chris.
You got a big enough voice.
It's clear that cities that have been built on Earth are not based on biomimicry principles, or it's pretty rare. So I wonder if you've seen any change in that in terms of cities. For instance, Masdar City in the Middle East, is that an example of biomimicry in your mind, or where are you finding inspiration there?
Well, some of what's happening in Masdar you could, but only like retroactively. We've been involved actually in a couple of projects. One, well, actually two of them in India, where we have a set of principles we call life's principles, which you can find on our website, that are sort of the universal principles. What are all 30 million species doing? And can we use those as the design guidelines for cities? And so we've involved some master plans in India There's only one city on the books, a brand new city from scratch in the United States that I know of right now, which is going to happen right outside the Denver airport. And we are part of that project, and the whole design team has agreed to adopt life's principles as the guidelines for that. So we're super excited. We'll see how it plays out, but we're starting to see more of that. I do think what's interesting is if you look at some of the healthiest cities on the planet, depending on how you define that, more often than not, they have, not intentionally, but they do demonstrate principles that come from life, Some of that organic, the sort of top-down master planning, that's not very organic, but the sort of niche and allowing small niche economies to pop up in different places. The best model, of course, is to think of an ecosystem, and what does a mature ecosystem, like a coral reef or a redwood forest, teach us around cities. So there's a lot of room that can go in that direction, for sure.
So cities can be retrofitted in a biomimicry fashion?
I think they could, yeah. It'll take time. I don't think we have a choice, actually. So it's just a matter of when we're going to, roll up the sleeves and do it.
Even Providence?
I haven't spent a lot of time studying Providence, but I would imagine that would be a great project for everybody to rally around. Okay, so I'll be around for today. If you have any other questions, you can catch me another time. Thank you.